Welcome to Tabernacle this morning. We're here to study in the Word of God, and we ask Him for His guidance as we inspect a portion of the Bible that I would say has been used in a way that probably was not the original intention, and that is in John chapter 20. And we're going to go through several verses here, starting with verse 26, where it says, "A week later his disciples were in the house again." And as you know me, I cannot start with a week later because I don't know what happened a week before. So I have named this sermon, "Not a Doubter." And I know we have all heard of this gentleman by the name of Thomas. And we usually refer to him as Doubting Thomas because he's become infamous because of some words he said, and we use out of context to label him a person who did not believe, when in reality it's a lot more complex than that. He is guilty of not believing. I'm not going to take that away from him, but we single him out of a group of unbelievers, of a group of people who had doubts, which brings me to the subject of faith. We're all very familiar with Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, that we sometimes kind of identify as the meaning of faith or the concept of faith. Somebody asks us, what is faith? And we usually quote Hebrews 11. When in reality, Hebrews 11:1, at least the first verse, is not intending to define what faith is. It is talking about a specific circumstance, and it's going to explain it throughout the chapter. So if we don't read the whole chapter of Hebrews 11, we get stuck on just the first verse. We might get a slightly biased impression of what faith is. It says that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And that can very easily take us to where 21st century America thinks of faith, right? Which is, there's this false practice. You all know I have an incurable disease, and a lot of people express to me their good wishes about my disease. And they come to me and they say something like, I know God is going to heal you because you are a man of faith. And I scratch my head on that one. And some other people tell me, just have faith and you'll see how God is going to heal you. So as if there's something I can do inside me that I can, maybe I have some doubts and that's why God is not healing me, but if I meditate hard or somehow do some sort of a spell that all the doubts go away, then God is going to do something that I wish He would. And it's like this desire that if you desire it hard enough, it will become true. It's kind of a positive thinking type of thing that we have. And we kind of confuse that with faith. But the concept of faith is not really related to this type of positive thinking. Today we're going to talk about this person who has been, I would say, unfairly singled out as a person who has doubts, doubting Thomas. Right? It starts in verse 26 by saying, "A week later, his disciples." And a week later of what? What happened in the prior days is going to really happen. If you thought in one passage where it really you need to know what happened in the last week in order to understand this. This is the right passage. So what happened in the prior week that influenced what is going to happen right now? So in reality, the original doesn't say a week later, it says 8 days later. Okay? 8 days later, this would put it on a Tuesday according to my calculations, but some people believe it was a Sunday. It doesn't really matter what day of the week it was. So if it doesn't matter what day of the week it was, because they met together every day. So if it doesn't matter what day of the week it was, why does it say that it was 1 week later or 8 days later? There is a reason for that, and it's very, very, very important, that it was at least 7 days after the resurrection. So in order to understand why, we have to go back. We have to go back to the beginning of that week and see what happened. So about 12 days ago, from what is going to happen today, about 12 days ago, Jesus spent so much time with his disciples in those 24 hours before his death and crucifixion and death, that John has written 7 chapters to describe those last 24 hours. 7 chapters are devoted to what happened in 24 hours of the life of Jesus. That happened about 12 days before this event. And about 11 days ago, Jesus was crucified and he died on the cross. 8 days ago, Jesus rose from the dead. And it happened, according to the Gospels, on the first day of the week, what we call a Sunday. Now, for a moment, I would like you to, if you can keep your passage here in John, go for just a second to Matthew 28 to see some of the details of what happened on that day, which I think are key to understanding what happened on this day. So, Matthew 28, look at the sequence. In verse 1, you will see that Mary Magdalene goes very early to the tomb, and she finds it empty. Okay? So, put it in your mind. The first fact, very early Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene and some other women go to the tomb, and it's empty. And in verse 7, it says that some angels told them, verse 7, then go quickly and tell his disciples. So who's speaking? Angels. And speaking to who? To Mary and other women. And they are telling them, go quickly and tell his disciples. Whose disciples? The disciples of Jesus. Go tell them what? He has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Okay, so that's the message. The message of the angels to the women is, go quickly, tell the disciples they need to go as fast as they can to Galilee, and I'm going to show up for them there in Galilee. Right? That's verse 7. Verse 8, it says the women did exactly what the angels told them to do. It says verse 8, the women hurried away from the tomb after afraid, they had some fear, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples. So they obeyed exactly what the angels told them to do. But on the way, they get stopped. On verse 9, it says that Jesus suddenly met with them on the way to see the disciples and reminded them that the message that they were supposed to carry was very important. What was the message? Greetings, he said. They came to him clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to" what? "Go to Galilee. There they will see me." You get the message is clear. At least to me, it is very clear. The angels tell the women, go tell the disciples to go to Galilee as soon as they can. Then they run, they get stopped by Jesus himself, repeats the same exact message. And then something happens between verse 11 and 15, that you know that the guards, all that story. And then you get to verse 16 of Matthew, and it says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee." That's the beauty of the Gospels. Right there. This is the need, the reason why we needed 4 Gospels. Because if you were reading Matthew alone, what was your impression? The women heard the message, run. Jesus told them again. They kept running. They told the disciples, and the disciples went to Galilee. But that's not the whole story. That's not what happened. And it's not that this is wrong. It's just that it's missing some details that were not important for Matthew to express. But in order for us to understand John and what happened with Thomas, we need to know what happened between verse 10 and verse 16. A lot happened between those 2 verses. Okay? So we can go and check on in Luke. If we go to Luke on chapter 24. Luke chapter 24. Same story. Verse 1. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. So we know it's the same story, right? Starts the same way. Verse 9. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. So there it is. Very clear. The women did their part. They told the disciples what Jesus had told them to tell the disciples. It was verse 10 tells us exactly who they were. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and others with them who told this to the apostles. They did their job. Verse 11. What happened? But they, who's they? The disciples did not believe the women. So who is the doubting bunch here? Is it Thomas? No. The disciples did not believe the message that the angels and Jesus himself had given to the women. The disciples did not believe this. And not only that, but it says, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. That's nonsense. No, that can't be. You've been taking that medicine too long. No. They do not believe the message from God. These are the disciples of Jesus. Okay? So verses 13 through 35, we went through those the other day. Hopefully most of you were here on that day, in which we saw the 2 disciples who went on the road to Emmaus. That's the way to pronounce it in Spanish, at least. And then Jesus went with them, and on the way they were expressing how disappointed they were, how sad they were, because they said that they had trusted Jesus to be the Messiah. We believed he was the Messiah, but he wasn't. At the end, he died. And they even said to Jesus, verse 23, verse 22. In addition, listen to this. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. So these disciples did hear the women. Yet they're sad, they're frustrated, they're giving up. They do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah anymore. So we checked it, the next verse, verse 24. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. So we checked them. We had enough sense to listen to the women, but we didn't believe it. So we sent our own scouts, and guess what? No, it was not true. So they are sad. And what did Jesus tell them? Remember that day? Verse 25. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. So that's the background. Verse 33, we see them that they return at once to Jerusalem, and there they found 11, and those with them assembled together and saying, it is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. Oh, now we know it's true because it has appeared to Simon, right? Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Verse 36, while they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. So now let's go back to John 20 to see the details of what's really going on here. In verse 18 of chapter 20, it mentions that Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord, and she told them that he had said these things to her. Verse 19 says, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. Now, it explains here that they were locked because, they thought maybe they were going to come after us, right? The guards have been selling this story that we have stolen the body of Jesus. So maybe they're going to come after us. So lock the door and this. Wait a minute, that's an important fact, but there's an even more important fact. What is the more important fact? They are not on their way to Galilee. They are locked in Jerusalem. That is very telling and is part of the story. And it says there in verse 19, on the evening of the first day of the week when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be to you. After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. You see what happened at that moment? Remember, this is on the same day of the resurrection. Jesus shows up where the 11 and some other disciples are meeting, and he says, yes, it is me. Believe it. Look, touch. Those words didn't come from Thomas. Those words came from Jesus. It's right there. Verse 20. After he said this, he showed them his hands and sides. So Jesus is the one who told them to look and touch to verify that he is who he says he is. But verse 24 says that Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him. So after this meeting of Jesus with the disciples come to Thomas and say, "We have seen him, we have seen him. You have to believe because we have seen him." You see what's happening here? They are trying to make him a second-hand witness. You have to believe because we have seen him. And the reaction of Thomas, then, those famous words that have been taken out of context, is he said to them, "Unless I see." Okay? So what he's saying is, I cannot believe because you have seen. It's okay for you to see. But you didn't believe before you saw either. None of them believed before they saw. Now that they have seen, they are trying to apply that to a person who hasn't seen it. And he goes like, "No. It's okay for you to believe because you have seen, but I haven't seen. Until I see, then I will believe." That's where we get then into verse 26, where we start our sermon today. Verse 26, a week later. What's the significance of a week later? Very important. Very important. Because, you know why? Galilee, it's about 6 to 7 days away. What does that mean? It means that in between the first day of the resurrection and this day that we're going to be looking today, there is no physical way they could have gone to Galilee and back. What does that mean? They're still in Jerusalem 7, 8 days later. And it says, a week later, just in case you think this is, that maybe they have gone to Galilee and this event is in Galilee. Nope. It says, verse 26, a week later his disciples were, where? In the house again. They were still locked in Jerusalem. The message was clear. Go to Galilee and you'll see me there. 8 days later, they're still in Jerusalem. All 11 of the disciples, plus a lot more. None of them believed the words of Jesus. So, this time, Thomas was with them. So, the first night was 10 disciples plus others. The second weekend, it was 11 because Thomas was there with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." The same greeting that he had given several of the other appearances before. Shalom. The peace of God be with you. Right? So, then he said to Thomas. So here, he's singling out Thomas. So in a sense, it is okay to single him out because Jesus is talking to Thomas at this point. But what he's not doing is Jesus is not singling him out in preference of the other 10 because they have done exactly the same thing. Last week, they did not believe until they saw. And he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands." So when I read this, knowing that the other 10 had done exactly the same thing, I have to believe that the tone of Jesus was not the tone that I usually read into this passage. That he's, no, Thomas, you bad boy, you didn't believe like the others. No, he is coming here with love and mercy and saying, Thomas, come, look, verify for yourself. I am here. I have come back from the dead. And says, put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. And stop doubting and believe. Stop doubting. So, I cannot totally exonerate Thomas because he should have believed. He should have believed. Why? Because Jesus, at least 3 times prior to his death and resurrection, had told the disciples, it is necessary for me to die and resurrect on the 3rd day. 3 times he had told his disciples. And Thomas was there with him all those 3 times. He had heard Jesus himself. He should have believed Jesus. I blame him for that. But that he's not believing the other 10? No, I think he's not guilty of that. He's saying, I want to see for myself. So, the words that come out after that are the most profound, it is the most profound statement about from one of the disciples about Jesus. This is even theologically richer than the words from Peter. Because what he said is, my Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. If you noticed, he didn't go and touch, at least it's not recorded that he went and touched Jesus' side or put his finger. It doesn't say that. It says that Jesus invited him to do so, and the next verse says that he surrendered to Jesus. Upon the evidence, he didn't have to touch Jesus. He just screamed from the bottom of his heart a recognition that Jesus was his Lord and his God. Now, think about this. This is coming from a Shema believing Jew. A Jewish person is very, very strict on the fact that the identity of the Jewish people comes from that verse that says, listen, Israel, the Lord your God is one. That's his identity. One God. For him to tell Jesus, you are my God. That is the recognition of the first commandment. Most of our commandments, when we look at the 10 commandments, we have kind of shortened them to a very list of very short 10 commandments. But when you read them in the Bible, the first commandment, and if you go to any synagogue, you'll find the same thing. The first commandment, it is, I am your God. That's the first commandment. I am your God. What Thomas is doing here is recognizing that he needs a God and that Jesus is the God that he's been worshiping and he's been pursuing all his life. You are my God. That is the concept of faith. So Jesus responds, verse 29, because you have seen me, you have believed. And some people might take this as a rebuke, right? You know, you should have believed without seeing. I don't think that's what Jesus is doing at all. Because that would be true in case all 10 had believed without seeing, and then Thomas was the bad guy who didn't believe. But that was not the case. So when Jesus is saying, because you've seen, you believe, he's not rebuking Thomas in front of the other 10. He's emphasizing the next part of that sentence that says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And those words, unfortunately, those words come in a way that is impossible to translate from the original language to English, so I'll have to do a little bit of a massaging there. The verb tense is in auristo. I don't know how to say that in English, but it's a form of a verb that doesn't have a tense. It's not past tense, it's not present, it's not future. That's all the forms we have in Spanish, or in English, in Spanish too, right? Those are the only forms we know. Something happened in the past, is happening now, or will happen in the future. But the Greek has a fourth mode, which is this mode in which the tense is not important. So you could say that this could be very valid translation would be, blessed are those who believe without seeing. And that being 2 verses before John 20:31 are very, very important, because then verse 30, John says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. Everything that is recorded in the Old Testament, everything that is recorded in the New Testament is factual. It is true. But the reason why it's included in the book is even more important than that. The reason why it's included is going to be said by John here in verse 31. Jesus made many other things. He did many, many other miracles, and he taught many other things. But the ones that I chose to write, these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. That's just what happened to Thomas. Thomas now believes that Jesus is the Messiah. And Jesus said, you believed because you saw. But blessed are going to be the ones from now on that will not have a way to see, that will not have a way to touch, and they will still believe. But the question is, believe what? I've been told many times that if I believe, I will be healed. Is that something worth believing in? The verse doesn't say that these were written in order for you to believe. The verse says these were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. It's not a matter of inventing your own hopes and then believing in them strong enough to make them come true as a self-fulfilled prophecy. It is choosing whether or not God is your God and that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Yes, you can have proof in your own life today that Jesus is the Messiah. Because if you believe, you will have life today. It's not some dream come true that will happen. You know, if all you believe is that by coming to this church and putting some money in the offerings and trying to live your life kind of better than the rest of the people, someday you'll get to heaven. Let me tell you, that is the wrong message. Nobody has come from heaven to demonstrate that that is true. Nobody has come back from hell to tell us, to warn us that that is true. So we don't have a way to prove what happens after life. But Jesus is saying here, or John is saying here, that if you believe in Jesus, you will have proof today because he will transform your life. You will have life. And Jesus offers abundant life that it's in your life. It's in you. It comes out of you. So the purpose of the gospel then is the purpose of these words, the purpose of why John wrote these words in the gospel is that we can have life in Jesus today. That's the purpose. So what about Hebrews 11 then? When it says that, to have faith is to, hope for the things that you have not seen. Well, if you continue reading the rest of Hebrews 11, you'll find that people like Sarah, she's a hero of the faith. But if you read the original story, when she heard that she was going to have a child at 90, she laughed in unbelief. She laughed, and Abraham laughed too. They could not believe that. But there was a wrinkle there in that story. The one who was promising was God the highest. And Hebrews says that she's a hero of faith because she believed him who made the promise. See? She looked at her body, she looked at her age, and she said, there's no way I can have a child. But then she looked at God and said, if God promises, I will believe God. So having faith was not that she concentrated enough to make it happen, but it was believing that he who made the promise was capable and willing to fulfill his promise. And then, when the child was born, you know what she named the child? Isaac. You know what Isaac means? It means laughter. And she explains why. She says, because I want everybody to laugh with me because of the joy that God fulfilled his promise. So her laughter of unbelief became a laughter of joy when God fulfilled his promise. So these words have been written. I believe that when Jesus says, blessed are those who believe without seeing, he's talking about you. He's talking about me. He's talking about us. We have no way of going back 20 centuries and check those facts. But if you believe, you will be blessed today. If you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, He will give you life. He will transform your life and make you live a life that you've never had before. And I believe there are many people in this room that are witnesses of that. And if you haven't experienced that in your life, come to God and say, you are my God. I surrender. Nothing else. Only you. You are my God. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for including the experience of doubting Thomas in the Bible, even though you didn't portray it that way. But it helps me because I'm full of doubts all the time. And it helps me realize that faith is not the absence of doubt, but is trusting He who made the promise. And I claim and I scream to you, Lord, you are my Lord, you are my God, and I trust you. And I ask you this morning, there's many people here that make the same claim, that cling to you even in the moments when everything is dark and everything seems negative and contrary to where we would like to be, that you show up in our lives and strengthen us, strengthen our faith, our lives, and give us that abundant life that you have promised. And if there is any person here who's struggling and going through processes that we don't even understand, I ask you, Lord, that your peace be with them when they declare you their God. In the name of Jesus, amen.